I was 62 the winter I learned how quietly a man can be erased. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic farewell, just 8 words, spoken gently, almost apologetically, over a phone line that suddenly felt miles longer than it was. Dad, don't come. Scott says it's too complicated. 8 words. For days before Christmas. Snow was drifting past the kitchen window when she said it. I remember watching it fall, slow and indifferent, as if the world had decided to move in silence while something inside me cracked. Hannah. My Hannah. The only child I ever had. The baby I held with trembling hands the first time they placed her in my arms. The little girl whose bike I steadied while she wobbled down the sidewalk. The teenager I drove to school every morning for 12 straight years. The young woman I stood beside on her wedding day, pretending not to cry when she walked toward another life. And now that same voice was telling me I didn't belong at Christmas. Hannah, what did you say? I asked, though I had heard every word. I suppose I was hoping for a correction, a laugh, a dad. I didn't mean it like that. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Scott thinks we should keep it simple this year. Just immediate family. You understand, right? Immediate family. I rolled those words around in my mind like something foreign. Wasn't I immediate? Wasn't I the one who stayed when her mother died? The one who worked 2 jobs so she wouldn't feel the absence too sharply? The one who refinished the floors and repainted the walls so her wedding photos would look perfect? Apparently, time rearranges definitions. I understand, I told her, because fathers have been lying about that sentence for generations. I hope you both have a beautiful Christmas. I ended the call before my voice betrayed me. For a long moment, I stood there in my kitchen, a 62-year-old man holding a silent phone, realizing that loneliness doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it simply informs you that you are no longer required. I sat at the oak dining table I had bought 20 years earlier. That table had held birthday cakes, homework papers, late-night talks, quiet breakfasts before school. The walls were covered in photographs. Hannah at 6, gap-toothed and grinning. Hannah in her graduation gown. Hannah in white lace, radiant and certain of her future. For days. Only 4 days until Christmas. And for the first time in my life, I had nowhere to go. The days before Christmas dissolved into each other, shapeless and colorless. I went through the motions. I opened the bookstore every morning like I had for the past 20 years. I shelved novels. I rang up purchases. I recommended titles with a polite smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Customers wished me Merry Christmas. I wished it back. Then I went home. The gifts were still there, stacked neatly in the corner of my living room. One for Hannah, one for Scott, one for Caleb, 12 years old now, growing taller in photos I saw online instead of in person. A boy I knew mostly through filtered pictures and brief captions. Busy weekend. Family time. So proud. Our schedule is just so full, Dad. You understand. I understood. I always understood. Until Christmas night arrived. By 6 o'clock, the silence in my apartment had grown loud enough to feel physical. The television was on, some holiday special playing to an audience that wasn't me. Outside, Denver was wrapped in heavy snow, glowing beneath streetlights. Laughter drifted past my window as families hurried toward warm houses and fuller tables. I couldn't sit there another second. I grabbed my coat and stepped into the cold without a destination. Snow gathered on my shoulders and melted into my hair. The city felt hollow. Most storefronts were dark. Cars were parked neatly in driveways where real celebrations were happening behind closed doors. On one corner, a few homeless men sat bundled in blankets, their breath fogging in the air. For a fleeting moment, I felt closer to them than to anyone else in the city. We were the afterthoughts. I walked until my feet began to ache. That's when I saw it. A small pub still lit from within. O'Malley's Irish Pub. Warm yellow light spilled onto the sidewalk like an invitation. When I opened the door, a bell chimed softly. The sound felt almost ceremonial. Inside, the room was quiet. A handful of tables were occupied, each by someone who looked as if they had also run out of somewhere to belong. A young server with bright red hair tied in a high ponytail gave me a sympathetic smile. "Table for one?" "Yes," I said. "Just one." Those two words landed heavier than I expected. She seated me by the window. I ordered a beer and a bowl of stew, though I wasn't sure I could taste either. Outside, shadows moved past the glass, arms linked, laughter visible even through the snow. "Excuse me, sir." I turned. A tall man, perhaps 70, stood beside my table. His silver hair caught the light, and his brown eyes were steady and kind. Next to him stood a petite woman in a red sweater decorated with tiny reindeer, her curls framing a gentle face. "Are you alone tonight?" he asked. "Yes. So are we," he said with an easy smile. "Our son is home with his own family this year. We figured sitting alone at home wasn't nearly as festive as coming out. I'm Clarence Hayes. This is my wife, Beatrice. Would you mind if we joined you? The place seems awfully crowded." I glanced around. The pub was nearly empty. He was giving me an out. Or maybe he was giving me a bridge. I met his eyes and saw no pity there, just recognition. "Of course," I said quietly. "Please." And just like that, the loneliest Christmas of my life shifted direction. Clarence and Beatrice didn't interrogate me. They didn't pry into why a man my age was eating stew alone on Christmas night. They simply talked. They told me about their son, Aaron, and his wife, Caroline. About their grandchildren, Abigail and Connor. About Texas summers and the long drive to Denver years ago. Beatrice described her stubborn rose bushes as if they were misbehaving children. Clarence spoke about fishing at dawn like it was a form of prayer. And for the first time in days, I forgot to count what I had lost. I didn't realize how tense I'd been until I felt it begin to loosen. Not disappear. Not heal. Just loosen enough for air to reach places that had felt sealed shut. We talked until the plates were nearly empty and the pub began to quiet even more. It wasn't profound conversation. No confessions. No life stories laid bare. Just small pieces of ordinary life shared without demand. As the server cleared our dishes, Beatrice folded her napkin carefully and looked at me. "Anthony," she said softly, as if she'd already known me longer than a few hours, "we have dinner every Sunday. Nothing formal. Just roast beef and mashed potatoes. If you'd ever like to join us, there's always room." I blinked, caught off guard. "You don't really know me," I said. Clarence gave a small shrug. "We know enough." "And what's that?" "That you're the kind of man who says thank you when he doesn't have to. That you listen. That you showed up tonight instead of hiding at home. That's usually enough." I told myself I wouldn't go. I meant it. But that Sunday afternoon, my apartment felt smaller than usual. The silence felt rehearsed. The phone remained still on the table, stubborn and silent. Without overthinking it, I found myself picking up my keys. Their house was modest. A single-story ranch in a quiet neighborhood. The lawn was trimmed neatly. Christmas lights still clung to the roofline, glowing softly against the early winter dusk. As I stepped out of my car, laughter spilled from inside the house. Not forced laughter, the easy kind. For a moment, I almost drove away. Then the front door opened. "Anthony," Beatrice called, as if she'd been watching for me. "You made it. Come in before you freeze." Warmth hit me first. Then the smell of roast beef and something buttery baking in the oven. Clarence stood in the kitchen wearing an apron that red-kissed the cook, pretending to be offended that Beatrice was supervising him. A younger couple sat on the sofa, leaning close together. Two children sprawled across the rug, arguing cheerfully over a board game. "Everyone," Beatrice announced. "This is Anthony Carter." Aaron stood and shook my hand firmly. "Nice to finally meet you. Mom and Dad mentioned you." I raised an eyebrow. "We've only met once." Clarence chuckled from the stove. "Sometimes once is enough." Dinner wasn't extraordinary. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, pie cooling on the counter. But the way they passed dishes without being asked. The way conversations overlapped without irritation. The way Abigail, 7 years old and missing one front tooth, leaned toward me to describe her new classroom in breathless detail. The way 5-year-old Connor climbed into Clarence's lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No one made space for me out of obligation. They simply included me. And somewhere between the second helping of potatoes and the last slice of pie, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not relief, belonging. That night, I drove home full in more ways than one. When Beatrice called that Friday and casually asked, "Same time Sunday?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, and the Sunday after that. And after that, little by little, Sundays stopped feeling like invitations. They became anchors. By Saturday evening, I would already be thinking about the smell of charcoal in Clarence's backyard, the way Beatrice hummed while peeling potatoes, the sound of the children arguing over something small and urgent. I started arriving early. Clarence would hand me the tongs without asking. I learned exactly how Beatrice liked her mashed potatoes. Creamy but not too smooth, with just enough butter to make them shine. Abigail would drag me toward the bookshelf with a stack of stories. Connor would tug at my sleeve until I stepped outside to throw a ball with him in the yard. It became routine. And routines, I discovered, can heal what grand gestures cannot. One afternoon, as we were sitting on the porch watching the sun dip low, Abigail looked up at me with complete seriousness. "Mr. Anthony, why don't you have a family?" "Abigail," Caroline said quickly, embarrassed, "that's not polite." But I smiled. "It's all right," I said, though the question slipped past my ribs like something sharp. "I do have a daughter. She's just busy building her own life." Abigail studied that answer carefully. "Then can you be my second grandpa?" she asked. "Grandpa Hayes already has lots of grandkids, but I only have one other grandpa. I think everyone should have two." The innocence in her voice nearly undid me. Children ask questions without realizing they're offering lifelines. "I would be very proud to," I told her, my voice steadier than I felt. Clarence reached over and squeezed my shoulder. No words. None were needed. 2 years moved forward quietly like that. Birthdays, barbecues, snow days, school plays. I was there when Abigail jumped into the pool without floaties for the first time. I was there when Connor walked into kindergarten clutching a backpack that looked too big for him. I painted walls with Aaron. I sat beside Beatrice in the garden, pressing tomato seedlings into warm soil. I had a life. Meanwhile, Hannah's world existed behind a screen. Photographs of vacations, smiling portraits, Caleb growing taller, older, a family framed perfectly. There was always one face missing. Mine. At first, I texted her on birthdays and holidays. I told myself consistency mattered. Love should be steady, even when unanswered. Her replies, when they came, were brief and careful. "Thanks, Dad. Hope you're doing well." Polite, distant, like correspondence between acquaintances. Eventually, I stopped expecting more. I told myself I had made peace with it. Then one Tuesday evening, the phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. For a moment, I was weightless. This was it. She missed me. She was ready. "Hannah?" I answered quickly, my voice bright with a hope I didn't bother to hide. "My girl. Dad." Her tone was strained. "Tired. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Hearing from you makes me better already." There was a pause. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." In the background, I heard Scott's voice, low and impatient. "We're in some trouble," she continued. "Scott lost his job 6 months ago. We're behind on payments. We might lose the house." The hope inside me cracked, thin and fragile. "How much?" I asked, though I already knew this wasn't a small request. 60,000, she said quickly, as if speed might make it lighter. "I know it's a lot, but you have your retirement savings. I'll pay you back. Promise. We just need a loan." $60,000. Nearly half of what I had saved over 40 years. 40 years of careful planning, of saying no to vacations, of packing lunches instead of eating out. I held the phone in silence, and in that silence, something shifted again. Not in her, in me. "Hannah," I said carefully, measuring each word. The last time we spoke was 2 years ago. 2 years. You didn't call on my birthday. You didn't call at Christmas. You didn't answer my emails. And now the first thing you say to me is that you need money. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Dad, I know I haven't been perfect, but this is different. We could lose the house. And during those 2 years, I asked, my voice no longer angry, only tired, did you ever wonder if I was still here? If I was lonely? If I needed you? Silence. Then her tone hardened. You're being selfish. I'm your daughter. You're supposed to help me. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not rage. Not bitterness. Clarity. No, I said quietly. I'm not supposed to finance your life. I'm supposed to be your father. And for 2 years, you decided you didn't need one. Dad, you chose to believe your husband over me. You chose distance. You chose silence. And now I'm choosing something too. I'm choosing not to be used. Her breath caught. So that's it? You're refusing? Yes. The word surprised even me with how steady it sounded. You and Scott will have to find another way. You can't do this. I can. I ended the call before my resolve could crack. The apartment felt darker afterward. I turned off my phone and sat there, hands shaking despite the calm that had carried me through the conversation. Had I protected myself? Or had I severed the last thread? A week later, an email arrived. You've made your priorities clear. You care more about money than your own daughter. Don't contact me again. I read it more times than I care to admit. Each sentence landed like a blade. But beneath the pain was something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting anymore. I didn't tell the Hayes family what had happened. I didn't want to cast shadows over something so bright. But Beatrice noticed the change in me. She always did. You did the right thing, she told me one evening as we sat on the back porch, the children's laughter drifting across the yard. Love without boundaries becomes permission for harm. I think I've lost her, I admitted. If you've lost her, she said gently, it wasn't because you said no. Sometimes people walk away from what they don't understand. And sometimes they walk back. I nodded, though I didn't allow myself to hope. 5 years moved forward quietly. Abigail entered middle school. Connor grew taller than I expected. I still worked at the bookstore. I still returned home to evenings of reading and measured silence. I wasn't joyful, but I was steady. Then one Friday in March, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Mr. Anthony Carter? Yes. This is Dr. Crawford from Denver General Hospital. I'm calling about Hannah Collins. You are listed as her emergency contact. The air left my lungs. What happened? She was involved in a serious car accident. She's in intensive care. We need you to come immediately. The drive to the hospital exists in my memory as fragments. Red lights, the blur of headlights, my own reflection in the windshield older than I remembered. I ran through the sliding doors, breath unsteady, asking for her name. They directed me upstairs. And there, in a stiff vinyl chair beneath harsh fluorescent lights, sat a boy I almost didn't recognize. Caleb. He looked smaller than he did in photographs. Caleb, I said softly. He looked up, confusion in his eyes. Who are you? I'm Anthony, your grandfather. He hesitated. I don't have a grandfather. The words struck hard. But I didn't argue. Where's your dad? I asked instead. He looked down at his hands. He left 6 months ago. It's just Mom and me. The world rearranged itself quietly in that moment. Dr. Crawford approached and explained the injuries. Severe trauma, broken bones, months of rehabilitation ahead. She'll need someone to stay with her, to help her recover, he said carefully. Are you able to take that responsibility? There was no calculation, no resentment, no memory of the email. I'll do it, I said, because whatever had happened between us, she was still my daughter. 2 weeks later, Hannah came home. The discharge papers were thick. The instructions were longer. The house, smaller than I remembered, felt fragile somehow. Paint flaked near the windows. The kitchen faucet dripped in uneven intervals. The place carried the quiet wear of a life that had been holding itself together by will alone. But it was hers, and so it became mine too. I moved into the spare room without ceremony. The first days were slow and heavy. Hannah couldn't stand without assistance. Every movement required patience. Every task took twice as long. She avoided my eyes whenever possible. When she did look at me, there was something unreadable there. Guilt, pride, confusion, perhaps all of it woven together. Caleb stayed mostly in his room. He answered politely when spoken to, but with the careful distance of someone who didn't yet know where I belonged. So I worked. I cooked meals that were easy to chew and gentle on medication. I learned the schedule of her pills. I drove her to physical therapy 3 mornings a week and sat in waiting rooms pretending to read. I helped her into the shower, into fresh clothes, into the small dignity of independence when she could manage it. I never mentioned the past. Not once. Because love, I had learned, doesn't keep score. Beatrice and Clarence visited often. They brought casseroles and soft bread. Aaron repaired the leaking sink without making a show of it. Abigail and Connor sent crayon-colored cards that said, "Feel better soon." Miss Hannah. The Hayes family moved quietly around us like steady light. Then one night, 3 weeks after she returned home, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in years. Crying. It was 2 in the morning. I found Hannah sitting upright in bed, shoulders shaking, tears sliding unchecked down her face. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "are you in pain?" She shook her head. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice breaking. "After everything. Why are you here?" I pulled the chair closer and sat beside her, careful of her bandages. "Because I'm your father," I said. "And that doesn't expire." She pressed her hands to her face. "I was cruel to you. I believed him. I let him separate us. I only called when I needed money. And when you said no, I punished you. What kind of daughter does that?" "A human one," I replied quietly. "One who was scared. One who loved someone and trusted the wrong person." She let out a bitter laugh. "He didn't stay. When things got hard, he left. Said he needed freedom. Said this wasn't what he signed up for. He's with someone else now. Younger. Easier." Anger flared in me for a moment, sharp and useless. I swallowed it. "I'm sorry," I said. "I wasted 7 years," she whispered. 7 years you could have been in Caleb's life. I can't get that back." "No," I agreed gently. "But we have tonight, and tomorrow, and all the ordinary days after that." She looked at me then, really looked at me. "Can you forgive me?" "I did," I said, "long before you asked." And then she leaned into me the way she used to when she was small and frightened by thunderstorms. I held her carefully, mindful of broken bones and fragile healing. As she cried against my shoulder, I felt something inside me shift. Not the erasing of pain, but the stitching of it. Slow, careful, real. The morning after our late-night conversation, Hannah surprised me. "Tell me about them," she said over breakfast, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "The Hayes family. All of it." So I did. I told her about that lonely Christmas at O'Malley's. About Clarence pretending the restaurant was crowded. About Beatrice's mashed potatoes. About Sunday dinners that slowly stitched me back together. About Abigail asking if I could be her second grandfather. Hannah listened quietly, her eyes soft. "I'd like to meet them," she said at last. "If they'd even want to meet me." "They will," I said. "They already do." 2 weeks later, with a cane steadying her steps, we drove to the Hayes house together. I had called ahead, but Beatrice had clearly prepared as if royalty were arriving. When Hannah stepped inside, Beatrice didn't hesitate. She crossed the room and wrapped her in an embrace so fierce it startled us both. "Thank you," Hannah whispered into her shoulder, "for loving my dad when I didn't." Beatrice pulled back, brushing tears from her cheeks. "You're his daughter," she said, "which means you're ours too." Dinner felt careful at first. Caleb sat quietly, observing everything, uncertain where he fit into this unfamiliar warmth. But Connor, oblivious to adult tension, tugged him outside with a soccer ball. Within minutes, I heard laughter. Real laughter. Later, as I drove them home beneath a pale sunset, Caleb spoke from the back seat. "Mr. Anthony?" "Yes, buddy. Mr. Hayes says you're their grandpa. So, can you be mine too? Like for real?" The road blurred in front of me. I had to pull over. "I'd be honored, Caleb," I managed. "Very honored." For months later, Hannah's divorce was finalized. Quiet, clean. Scott wanted nothing. Hannah wanted nothing from him either. She and Caleb moved into a small apartment just 3 miles from my house. Close enough for spontaneous dinners. Far enough for independence. And Sunday dinners at the Hayes house gained 2 more chairs. One early autumn evening, I sat at that familiar table and let the moment settle around me. Clarence was mid-story, animated as ever. Aaron groaned at a punchline he'd heard before. Beatrice moved between the stove and the table like a conductor of comfort. Caroline sliced roast with practiced ease. Hannah leaned toward Caroline, laughing softly about something at her new accounting job. Caleb and Connor darted through the living room, Abigail chasing after them. All noise and energy in life. And I sat there, Anthony Carter, 69 years old, surrounded. "Oh, Anthony," Beatrice called from the kitchen. "Another slice of pie?" "Just a small one," I said. Clarence laughed. "He says that every time. Grandpa eats pie like me," Connor declared, bursting into the room. "That's because I trained him well," I said, ruffling his hair. Across the table, Hannah met my eyes. There was a faint scar on her forehead now, a thin silver reminder of what almost took her from us. But she stood straighter. She smiled more easily. She was rebuilding brick by brick. And this time, I wasn't an outsider looking in. I wasn't a wallet. I wasn't an afterthought. I was simply her father. And I was home. "Dad," Hannah said softly while we were stacking plates in the kitchen, "there's something I need to tell you." We stepped outside onto the back porch. The evening sky was streaked with orange and rose, the kind of sunset that makes everything feel briefly suspended between endings and beginnings. "I saw my doctor this morning," she said. "He says I'm fully recovered. No more physical therapy." I smiled. "That's the best news I've heard all week." She nodded, but her expression shifted. Not anxious, just thoughtful. "And I think it's time," she continued. "Time for Caleb and me to build something permanent. Not just another apartment. A home." "You're ready to buy?" I asked. "Yes," she inhaled slowly. "But I don't want your money. I don't ever want our relationship to be about money again. I want your time, your advice. I want you next to me when I make the decision. Like a real father." The words caught somewhere in my throat. "I would love that," I managed. "More than you know." She smiled then, the unguarded smile I hadn't seen in years. "And I want the house to have a big living room," she added. "Big enough for Sunday dinners. I want the Hayes family there sometimes. I want Caleb to grow up knowing that family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who shows up." I pulled her into an embrace, not because something was breaking, but because something had finally healed. The following weekend, we began touring houses. Caleb treated it like an adventure. He walked through basements asking about wiring and water heaters, peering at foundations like a small inspector. He called me expert grandpa, which I pretended to take very seriously. One afternoon, while Hannah stepped out to speak with a realtor, Caleb lingered beside me. "Grandpa," he asked quietly, "why didn't you and Mom talk for so long?" I looked toward Hannah. She met my eyes from across the yard and gave the smallest nod. "Sometimes adults lose their way," I said carefully. "We listen to the wrong voices. We forget what matters. But if we're lucky, we find our way back." "So you still loved Mom the whole time?" he pressed. "Even when she wasn't a very nice?" "I never stopped," I said. "That's how it works when you're a parent. Love doesn't shut off." He thought about that. Then he said, simply, "You're the best grandfather." Hannah wiped her eyes from the driver's seat, but she was smiling. In October, we found it. A modest 3-bedroom ranch with sunlight pouring through wide windows, a backyard big enough for soccer games, and a living room that could hold more chairs than it technically needed. Hannah handled the down payment herself. Insurance settlement, savings, steady work. I helped with negotiations and inspections, the practical parts. The day she received the keys, the Hayes family came over with food, balloons, and a folding table for the backyard. We toasted with champagne for the adults and apple juice for the kids. Clarence lifted his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, eyes shining. "And to family, the kind you're born into and the kind you build." I looked around that living room, still smelling faintly of fresh paint. And I knew, without hesitation, that the house was not the miracle. The miracle was that we were all standing in it together. The first Sunday dinner at Hannah's new house came with the scent of autumn in the air. The trees in her backyard had begun to turn gold, and the windows were open just enough to let the cool breeze carry in the sound of children laughing. Hannah insisted on cooking the turkey herself, though Beatrice stood nearby like a quiet guardian, adjusting seasoning and oven temperature with gentle authority. Caleb moved around the dining room with serious concentration, counting chairs twice. "We don't want anyone left out," he said. When we finally sat down, Clarence and Beatrice at one end, Aaron and Caroline beside them, Abigail and Connor across from Caleb, Hannah near the head of the table, and me somewhere in the middle, I paused. I didn't say anything. I just looked. There was conversation layered over conversation. Plates being passed. Someone reaching for gravy. Someone laughing too loudly. It was imperfect and loud and alive. And in that moment, I felt something settle inside me. This was not an accident. This was home. "Mr. Anthony," Abigail said suddenly. She was 14 now, her voice steadier, her posture taller. "Yes, Abby?" She hesitated, then smiled. "I'm really glad you went out that Christmas night. If you had stayed home, we wouldn't have met you. And I wouldn't have my second grandfather." Connor leaned forward. "Best grandfather," he corrected. Caleb glanced at them, then at me. "You're my grandfather too," he said softly. "Not just because you're Mom's dad, but because you stayed." Hannah reached over and laced her fingers through mine. She didn't need to speak. After dinner, while the children ran through the yard and the adults gathered on the porch with warm cups of coffee, Clarence lowered himself into the chair beside mine. "Do you remember that night at O'Malley's?" he asked. "Every detail," I replied. "We saw a man who thought he'd been left behind," Clarence said. "We didn't know the story, but we knew he needed a table. I thought I'd lost everything," I admitted. "I thought that was the end." He smiled. "Turns out, it was the beginning." Beatrice joined us, resting her hand on my shoulder. "Family isn't always something you're born into," she said. "Sometimes it's something you're brave enough to accept." Before I could respond, Hannah stepped outside with Caleb beside her. "Dad," she said, "we have something for you." Caleb handed me a wooden picture frame. Inside was a photo taken the week before. All of us squeezed together in Hannah's living room, laughing mid-motion, imperfect and unposed. But beneath the photo was a handwritten message. "Family isn't who you start with. It's who refuses to leave." And below it were signatures: Clarence, Beatrice, Aaron, Caroline, Abigail, Connor, Hannah, Caleb. In the center, written larger than the rest: "Grandpa Anthony, the heart of our family." My vision blurred. For a moment I couldn't speak. When I finally did, it was only a whisper. "Thank you." So that's my story. A man who once believed he had been erased on Christmas night. A man who walked into a small pub because he couldn't bear the silence. A man who discovered that sometimes the family you lose is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is simply the doorway to the one you were meant to have. Now, on Sundays, I sit at the table with 10 people. 10 people who love me. 10 people I love. And though I lost Hannah for 7 years, though I went through deep pain and loneliness, I wouldn't change anything. Because that path, that painful path, led me here. To wholeness. And finally, after all those years, I'd come home.